My brother threw a glass of red wine in my face at my own parents' anniversary dinner in front of 40 people because I refused to hand him the keys to the Lakehouse. He laughed. His wife laughed. And then, a Crown prosecutor, sitting 3 chairs down quietly, set her fork on the table and stood up. That's where this story really starts. But to understand why it ended the way it did, I have to take you back about 14 months. I am 31 years old. I'm a licensed structural engineer based in Ottawa. I've been working since I was 16, hostess, then server, then tutoring on the side through university, then co-op, then junior engineer, then the slow, grinding climb to the firm I now run with one other partner. My name is on the door. Not because anyone handed me anything, but because I spent years doing work that made other people's names famous before I finally had enough leverage to build something of my own. The Lakehouse is called Kinloch. It sits on the eastern shore of a small lake in the Laurentians, about 2 hours north of the city. My grandmother bought it in 1979 for $23,000. She left it to me when she passed 4 years ago. Not to my parents. Not to my brother. To me, because I was the one who drove up every summer to fix the dock, recork the windows, clear the snow load off the roof in February when she couldn't anymore. She left me a note with the deed. It said simply, "You always showed up. Don't let them take this from you." I didn't know then what she meant. I do now. My brother's name is Nolan. He's 34. He has always been, in the very specific way that only middle-class families can produce, a man who feels that proximity to effort should count as effort itself. He watched me work. He was therefore adjacent to working. In his mind, this made us roughly equivalent. Our parents, my father, a retired high school vice principal, my mother, a bookkeeper who semi-retired last year, had always drawn a very firm, very loving, very damaging line between us. Nolan was the social one. I was the responsible one. Nolan needed to be kept happy. I needed to be kept busy. The logic was never spoken aloud, but it ran underneath every family interaction like a buried pipe, and eventually it corroded everything. Nolan met his wife, Cassandra, 3 years ago. I want to be fair to her, so I'll say this in another context. I think Cassandra might be fine. She's from money. Old money, the kind that doesn't talk about money, which means it talks about money constantly, just in code about money constantly, just in code. She speaks in a particular dialect of aspirational entitlement, where everything she wants is described as something she deserves, and everything she doesn't have yet is framed as an injustice being done to her by the universe. She told me once, at a dinner that I cooked, that she found it so inspiring that I had managed to build a career without any real connections. I thanked her and excused myself to the kitchen. When Nolan and Cassandra got engaged, I was happy for him. Genuinely. I flew back from a site visit in Vancouver to be there for the party. I bought them an expensive espresso machine off their registry, and I stood in my parents' backyard and toasted them with a glass of Riesling and meant it. I thought maybe this is the version of Nolan that sticks. The one who has someone to settle into. The one who stops measuring his life against mine. That lasted about 6 weeks. The text started the month after the engagement. Cassandra's, not Nolan's. She went through him the way water goes through a drainage ditch, following the path of least resistance, using him to get wherever she was going. Hey, Nolan and I were talking and we think it would be so amazing to have the wedding at Kinloch. It's so beautiful and it would be so special for the family. Obviously we'd cover everything, just the venue itself. You know how weddings are, Lobal. I wrote back warmly. I explained that Kinloch wasn't really set up for events. No outdoor power, no septic capacity for 40+ guests, no level ground for a tent. I offered to help them find a venue in the Laurentians. I sent 3 links to beautiful properties within their stated budget. Cassandra responded 2 days later. Wow, okay, didn't realize it was going to be a whole thing. I let that one go. 3 months before the wedding, Nolan called me. Not a text, a call. That should have been my first warning. Nolan doesn't call unless he wants something, and he's been coached to make it feel serious. "We've been thinking," he said, "and we'd really love to do our honeymoon at Kinloch. Just a few weeks, maybe 3. We take care of everything." I felt a small familiar tightening behind my sternum. 3 weeks is a long time, Nolan. I use it in July. "You can come up another time. You're always working anyway." "I work up there. It's where I do my best thinking." "Right, but it's not like you live there. It just sits empty most of the year." This was not true. I was up there at least 8 weekends a year plus 2 full weeks in summer. But I knew this wasn't really an argument about vacancy rates. I made an offer. I told him I would give them a full week in late August, after my 2 weeks, before the fall, and that I'd make sure the place was stocked and comfortable. I told him I'd pay for a cleaning service before and after. I said I was happy to do that. The silence on the other end of the line was the specific silence of a man who has just received a gift and is calculating how to return it for something more expensive. "Cassandra's not going to love that," he said. "She had her heart set on 3 weeks, the whole Mediterranean feel of it." "Kinloch is a freshwater lake in Quebec, Nolan. You know what I mean." I held that conversation in my head for a few days, and then I called my parents and let them know I'd offered a week, and that was my final word on it. My mother's response was, "Don't you think you're being a little rigid? He's your brother." My father said nothing, which is what my father always said when he agreed with my mother. Then 2 months before their wedding, Cassandra sent me a voice note through my brother's phone, 4 minutes long. I listened to it twice because I genuinely couldn't believe what I was hearing. She explained that she and Nolan had reframed the situation. The problem, she said, wasn't the honeymoon. The problem was the ownership structure. Kinloch had been in the family for decades. It should be a family asset. The fact that my grandmother had left it to me specifically and only me was, in Cassandra's view, something my grandmother might have felt differently about if she'd had more time to think it through. She said she wasn't trying to be difficult. She said what would make sense, what would be fair, was if Nolan were added to the title. Co-ownership, because then it would truly be a family property, and of course, as co-owner, he would have the right to use it for a 3-week honeymoon. She finished by saying, "I just think family should be family, you know." I don't think Elise would have wanted this much tension. Elise was my grandmother's name. I sat with that voice note for a long time. I felt something shift in me, something that had been loose and rattling around for years, finally click into a load-bearing position. I did not respond to the voice note. I called my lawyer instead. Her name is Theodora Teddy, to everyone who knows her, and she had done the probate work on Kinloch's transfer 4 years ago. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting, which I've learned is the sound a very good lawyer makes when she's already building something in her head. "Okay," she said when I finished. "Here's what you're going to do. Nothing. Don't respond to the voice note. Don't discuss Kinloch with Nolan or Cassandra again. If they bring it up, you say, that conversation goes through my lawyer, and then you call me." I asked her if I needed to do anything to protect the title. She said not yet, but to send her everything in writing. Every text, every voice note, the original will, the deed. I sent them all that night. Then I decided to go to my parents' anniversary dinner. My parents had been married for 37 years. Every year my mother organizes a dinner for the milestone. This year it was at a restored heritage farmhouse outside Almonte, the kind of place with exposed timber beams and a prefix-y menu and a wine list that assumed you knew what Côte de Rhône meant. My parents had invited 40 people, family, old friends, neighbors they'd had for 20 years. It was a beautiful room. I wore a green dress I bought in Montreal, and I arrived early to help my mother with the seating cards. Nolan and Cassandra arrived 40 minutes late. She was in ivory, bone. She corrected my aunt when my aunt said that's a beautiful white dress. And Nolan was in a blazer he'd clearly just bought, the fold lines from the packaging still visible on the sleeves. They swept in like they were the occasion. I was at the end of the table nearest the window, seated between my cousin and a woman named Philippa, who'd been my mother's closest friend for 25 years and who I later found out had recently been appointed as a Crown prosecutor for the region after 20 years as a defense attorney. I had met Philippa many times over the years. She was compact and precise and had the specific quality of stillness that comes from spending decades in rooms where the wrong word cost someone everything. Dinner was lovely, actually, for the first hour. My father made a toast. My mother cried a little. My cousin told a story about a camping trip that made the whole table laugh. The food was exceptional. That confit, roasted root vegetables, fresh bread that disappeared faster than the kitchen could bring it. The wine was a Burgundy I didn't know the name of and didn't need to. Then Nolan stood up. He had not been asked to speak. My mother had asked each table to give a short toast in a structured way, going around the room. It was not Nolan's turn, but Nolan had clearly had 3 glasses of wine, and Cassandra, beside him, was wearing the expression of a woman watching a plan execute. "I just want to say," he began, his voice slightly too loud for the room, "how grateful I am for this family, for how much we all love each other, how much we all give to each other." Some people raised their glasses. I raised mine, watching him carefully. "And I want to take this moment because we're all here together," he continued, beginning to walk mic in hand, energy, no mic, down the length of the table toward me to say something that I think needs to be said. "My sister has been given an incredible gift by our grandmother, a property that belongs to this family's history." He stopped behind my chair. "And I've asked very simply, very kindly, to be included in that legacy. As her brother, as family." He spread his hands wide, appealing to the table. "All I've asked is for the chance to be part of something that should belong to all of us." The room had gone the particular quiet of people who aren't sure if this is a toast or a scene. I set my glass down. I kept my voice even, the way I do in site meetings when a contractor has made an expensive mistake and is waiting to see how I'll handle it. "Nolan, we've talked about this. This isn't the place." "No, see, that's the thing," he said, and his voice had an edge to it now that I recognized. It was the voice he used at 17, when I wouldn't let him borrow my car, stretched into an adult body. "You always say it's not the place. There's never a place. You just shut the door and expect everyone to be grateful that you deigned to share a week with us, like you're doing us a favor, like we're tenants." "You're describing an offer I made in good faith," I said quietly. "Good faith?" He laughed, a short, unpleasant sound. "You gave Grammy the impression she owed you the house. All those weekends, all that showing up, that was a transaction, and the rest of us didn't know we were supposed to be competing." I felt the blood drain from my face and then, almost immediately, return as something colder. "Nolan," I said, "sit down." He picked up his wine glass. I genuinely did not expect what happened next. I don't think anyone at that table did. He threw it. The wine, a full glass of Burgundy, hit me across the left side of my face and the front of my dress. The cold of it registered before the shock did. I heard the gasps before I processed what had happened. I sat there, wine dripping from my chin onto the white tablecloth, and I thought, very clearly, Grammy knew. She knew, and she still couldn't have imagined this. Cassandra laughed. It was a small sound, quickly suppressed, but I heard it. Several people at the table heard it. Nolan was already pivoting to the room, arms out, trying to reframe it as a fumble. "Oh God, that slipped. Philippa had already stood up. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. There's a particular quality to the voice of a person who has spent years speaking to juries. It doesn't fill a room. It occupies it. Every other sound stops. "Nolan," she said, "that was not an accident. I was watching you. I am going to ask the staff to call the police, and I am going to give a statement." "Philippa, it's a family dinner," my mother started. "Judith." Philippa looked at my mother with something that was not unkindness, but left no room for negotiation. "Your daughter has wine on her face and food on her dress, and your son is standing over her. This is not about the dinner." She turned to a server who had appeared at the edge of the room, frozen. Would you please contact the premises manager and ask them to call the non-emergency line for the OPP? Thank you." The server disappeared. Nolan's face had gone from red with wine and anger to a specific shade of pale that I recognized as the color of someone who has just understood that they have made an irreversible calculation error. "This is insane," Cassandra said, standing up. "It was wine. He didn't hit anyone. This is unbelievable." "Cassandra." Philippa turned to look at her for the first time, and it was a look I will never forget for the rest of my life. It was not angry. It was the precise, professional look of a woman cataloguing everything she's observing for later use. "I'd encourage you to stop speaking." Philippa came around the table to me. She crouched beside my chair. She handed me a cloth napkin and her voice dropped to something private. "Are you hurt?" I touched my face. The wine had hit me hard enough to sting, but there was nothing worse than that. "No. I'm just..." I stopped. My voice had done something unexpected, and I needed a second to retrieve it. "I'm okay." "Good," she said. "Keep that napkin. The dye from red wine on skin can document contact. Don't wipe your face with anything else." Then quieter still, "Do you want to pursue this?" I thought about my grandmother's note. "Don't let them take this from you." "Yes," I said, "I do." What followed was slow and procedural in the way that real legal consequences always are, which is to say, nothing like television. The OPP arrived within 20 minutes, a single officer initially, then a second. They were calm and methodical. They spoke to Nolan, who had by then switched from bluster to remorse with the specific speed of a man whose wife was squeezing his arm. They spoke to Cassandra, who described the incident as a complete misunderstanding and an accident at least 4 times. They spoke to Philippa, who gave a statement that was, by all accounts, devastatingly clear. Then they spoke to me. I had already, quietly, stepped away from the table to call Teddy. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what had happened. There was a brief silence. "Right," she said, in the tone of a person who has just found the answer to an equation they've been working on for months. "File the report. Get the officer's card. Document your dress and your face with your phone. Photos, time-stamped, before you clean anything. And don't say a single word to Nolan or Cassandra tonight. From this moment on, they speak to me." I went back into the room and took the photos. My parents watched me do it from across the table. My mother's face was a topography of conflict that I recognized and had been navigating my entire life. My father looked at the floor. Nolan was not arrested that night. The officer explained that for an incident of this nature, they were documenting it as an occurrence and would be following up. Philippa, who understood the system in a way I was only beginning to, told me privately that what mattered now was the paper trail. "He'll likely be contacted by the Crown's office within the next few weeks," she said, "depending on how it's characterized, and I will make sure my statement characterizes it accurately. He could be looking at mischief, assault, or both. The fact that 40 people witnessed it, including me, matters a great deal." I drove home to Ottawa that night. I didn't cry until I was through the door of my apartment, and then I cried for about 20 minutes. And then I washed my face and made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table and started writing everything down. Every text from Cassandra, the voice note, the conversation about the honeymoon, the call with Teddy, every date, every detail, every shift in the story they've been building. I am a structural engineer. I understand load paths. I understand how a structure fails. Not usually because of one catastrophic event, but because of the slow accumulation of stress on an undersized element. Nolan and Cassandra had been applying pressure to the wrong joint for over a year. They had assumed I was a soft point. They had assumed that being my brother meant he had an equity stake in my life. My phone, when I checked it before bed, had 17 missed calls. 4 from my mother, 3 from my father, 2 from Nolan, 1 from Cassandra from an unknown number, and 1, at 11:42 p.m., from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Nolan from a friend's phone. The voicemail said, "Audrey, come on. It was whine. "Can we just call me back, please? This is getting out of hand." The thing about a voicemail like that is that it tells you everything about what a person believes is out of hand. It wasn't out of hand when Cassandra sent me a 4-minute voice note suggesting my grandmother's final wishes were a clerical error. It wasn't out of hand when they spent 14 months pressuring me for a property that had been legally and clearly left to me. It only became out of hand when there were consequences. I did not call back. Teddy was in contact with Nolan's lawyer. He had hired one by Monday morning, a reasonably good criminal defense lawyer from the same firm that handles his business, incorporation within 48 hours. The following week, Philippa's formal statement was submitted to the Crown's office. It was, Teddy told me, exceptional. Philippa had included not only the incident itself, but Cassandra's laugh, Nolan's framing of the wine throw as a fumble, the sequence of events, the spatial relationship between Nolan and me at the time of the throw. It was the statement of a person who has spent decades understanding exactly how evidence works. 3 weeks after the dinner, I received a call from my mother. She was not calling to check on me. She was calling to ask me to drop the matter. "He's your brother," she said, which is the sentence she has used my entire life as though it were a complete argument. "I know who he is, Mom. He's beside himself. He's not sleeping. His lawyer is costing him, well, a lot. Cassandra is. She's very stressed." I waited. "I just don't understand," my mother said. "Why you can't let this go. It was wine. You weren't hurt." I thought about how to respond to that. I thought about all the ways I had been letting things go for 31 years. The co-signed loan for the car. The birthday money I never got back. The weekend Nolan and some friends had used my apartment without asking while I was in Halifax for a conference, and left it in a state that took me an entire day to clean. The voice note, the pressure, the slow grinding pressure, applied over a year by 2 people who had never once considered that I might have a point of view worth accommodating. "Mom," I said, when I was sitting there with wine on my face, in my dress, in front of 40 people, "did you think about asking him to let it go?" She didn't answer. "I'm not dropping anything," I said, "and I love you. But if you call me again to advocate for the person who did this to me, I'm going to need some space from this conversation." She hung up. Then I called Teddy and told her I wanted to do something proactive. I told her I wanted to understand exactly what my options were regarding Kinloch and any future claims against it. Teddy walked me through it. Because the property had been transferred by will directly to me, with no mention of shared interest, and because no co-ownership agreement had ever been signed, there was no legal basis for any claim Nolan might make on the title. However, and this was the part that mattered, I could take a step that would make any future attempts significantly more complicated. I could transfer the property into a holding structure, a bare trust, with a named trustee, and register it accordingly, not because I was doing anything wrong, precisely because I wasn't. "It makes the asset cleaner," Teddy explained. "It makes it very clear in a documented, registered way that you are the sole beneficiary and that there is no ambiguity about that. If they ever tried to pursue a claim, and frankly after this week, I wouldn't rule anything out, they'd be fighting the structure before they got anywhere near the substance." I told her to do it. She filed the paperwork within the week. The court date was a Thursday in February. Not a trial, a preliminary appearance. Nolan had been charged with 1 count of assault. The Crown had determined that the witness evidence was sufficient, Philippa's statement being the cornerstone. I sat with Teddy in the gallery. Philippa was not present. She had submitted her affidavit, and it would speak for itself. My parents were there, in the back row, not looking at me. Nolan arrived with his lawyer. He was wearing a suit, and he looked like he hadn't been sleeping well, which was accurate and which I could not find it in myself to feel sorry about. Cassandra was not there. Teddy had mentioned when I asked that Cassandra had apparently returned to her parents' home in Westmount for the time being. I noted this and said nothing. The judge, the Honourable Margaret Thiessen, who I looked up the night before and who had 30 years on the provincial bench and a reputation for what her former clerks described online as an extremely low tolerance for wasted time, reviewed the file with an expression that I can only describe as professionally unimpressed. The defence argued that this was a minor incident between family members, that no injury had been sustained, and that Nolan had no prior record. They pushed for a peace bond with conditions rather than a finding of guilt. The Crown pointed out that the incident had 40 witnesses, that the primary witness was a former criminal defence counsel with 20 years of experience and a current prosecutorial appointment, that the accused had, subsequent to the incident, attempted to characterise his intentional act as an accident to at least 6 witnesses present, which the Crown was prepared to argue constituted a post-incident attempt to mislead. Justice Thiessen looked at Nolan over her glasses. "Mr. Coleman," she said, using his surname in a way that made it sound like a verdict, "I have read the witness statement submitted by counsel. I have also read the statement from the officer on scene and the victim impact report. This was not a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is when you reach for your wine glass and knock it over. A witness of this credibility has specifically indicated that you picked the glass up, turned toward your sister, and made a directed throw." She set the file down. "I'm not interested in a peace bond. I'm interested in a plea, and I'm interested in it being one that reflects what actually happened." Nolan's lawyer leaned over and whispered something. Nolan's face did a complicated thing that moved through anger and calculation, and something I hadn't seen from him in a very long time, which was shame. Then he nodded. He pled guilty to simple assault. Justice Thiessen gave him a conditional discharge, no criminal record if he completed 12 months of probation, a 200-hour community service requirement, and a mandatory 32-week counseling program through an anger management and family conflict service. She also issued a no-contact order. Nolan was not to contact me, directly or indirectly, for the duration of the probation period. As we filed out of the courtroom, I passed my parents in the gallery. My mother reached out and touched my arm. I stopped. "We're sorry," my father said. It was the first time I had heard him say that to me without qualification, without a but, without a second clause about what I could have done differently. He just said it, and his voice was the voice of a man who has recently had to take a very clear-eyed look at something he'd been looking away from for a long time. I nodded. I wasn't ready for more than that, but I noted it. Outside the courthouse, Teddy squeezed my arm. "Kinloch's registered. The trust is filed. Nobody touches it without going through 3 lawyers and a land registry." I actually laughed, for what felt like the first time in weeks. The months that followed were quieter than I expected and busier than I could have predicted. The no-contact order meant that the cycle of calls and pressure and sideways guilt that had been running in the background of my life for over a year simply stopped. I hadn't realized how much ambient weight I'd been carrying until it wasn't there anymore. Cassandra returned from Westmount, and she and Nolan had some version of a reckoning that I was not privy to and did not ask about. I heard through my cousin that she had gone back to work, a marketing role at a real estate firm in Verdun, and that the social media persona she'd been building, the one premised on a lifestyle that was substantially mine, had gone very quiet. I did not look at her profiles. I chose not to. My parents came to Kinloch in late June. It was the first time in 4 years that they had visited without Nolan being there. My mother brought maple oat squares and my father brought a bottle of Ontario Pinot Noir that he'd been saving for something, though he didn't specify what. We sat on the dock in the evening and watched the light go off the water and didn't talk about any of it, and that was exactly right. About 8 months after the court date, I received an email from Nolan. He had sent it to my work address, which was technically not a violation of the no-contact order, because the order had expired the previous month at the completion of his probation. The email was long. It was not polished and it was not looking for anything. It started with, "I don't expect you to reply to this. I'm writing it because my counselor said I should, and because I think she's right. And I'm trying to do the things people who are right tell me to do." He wrote about our childhood in a way that surprised me, with specificity and accountability that I hadn't thought he was capable of. He wrote about the car, the apartment, the voice note, which he described as something he had let happen and then told himself he wasn't responsible for because the words were Cassandra's. He wrote about the dinner, the wine, the moment he decided to do it, and the way he had framed it in his head as something he was owed. He wrote, "I have spent a long time believing that your success was something that should automatically include me, and I want you to know that I understand now that I was wrong. Grammy's note was right. You showed up. I didn't. That's the whole story." I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop and went for a walk along the Rado Canal because I needed air and cold water and the specific, particular comfort of a city that just keeps moving regardless of what's happening in anyone's family. When I got back, I wrote him one paragraph. I told him I had received the email and that I appreciated it. I told him that the no contact period had given me more clarity than any conversation would have. I told him that I wasn't ready for things to be normal, but that I didn't want them to be permanently broken either. I told him to keep doing the work. That was 4 months ago. Ken Loach is booked for the last 2 weeks of July. I'll be doing the preliminary design work for a net zero retrofit on a lakeside heritage property near Brockville, a client who found me through a referral from a colleague and who wants specifically a female engineer with sustainability credentials. I have a good camp stove, a new kayak, and a sketchbook that's already half filled with early concepts. The dock has a new section I replaced last autumn. The wood is brighter than the weathered old planks around it. By next summer, it'll have evened out enough that you won't notice where the new wood starts and the old wood ends. That's more or less how I think about all of it now. The damage was real. The repair is real. Give it time, and you might not be able to see the seam. But the structure holds. That's the part that matters. The structure holds. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from one dramatic moment, but from years of small concessions that you told yourself didn't count. The co-signed lease. The overlooked comment. The request you said yes to, because saying no felt like it would cost you more than just saying yes. I think about that a lot now. How much energy I spent maintaining a version of peace that was never really peace, just the temporary absence of conflict. What Nolan did at that dinner was wrong. That part is simple. But what made it possible wasn't just him, and it wasn't just Cassandra. It was a long pattern of me absorbing things I should have named, and a long pattern of him never being asked to account for what he took. That's not a judgment I make with anger anymore. It's just a thing I can see clearly now, that I'm standing far enough back from it. I've been thinking about what actually held through all of it. Not the legal strategy, though Teddy was extraordinary, and Philippa's statement was something I will be grateful for the rest of my life. I mean something quieter than that. I think what held was a kind of moral clarity that I almost talked myself out of more than once. The impulse to drop everything, to smooth it over, to protect my mother from a difficult dinner. I felt all of that. I just didn't act on it. And I think that choice, repeated over several months in small ways, is what made the larger outcome possible. Doing the right thing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just not doing the wrong thing when it would be easier to. The intelligence part of it, and I mean that in the plainest sense, knowing how something actually works before you assume, mattered more than I expected. Understanding that the property was legally unambiguous. Understanding what a witness affidavit from someone like Philippa would mean in a provincial courtroom. Understanding that the voice note, the texts, the pressure campaign, all of it could be documented and submitted. I had spent a year feeling like I was fighting a feeling. The moment I started treating it as a structure with weak points, everything shifted. And then there's the part that's harder to name, the part that kept me in the room even when the room was painful. I didn't drop the report. I didn't call Nolan back. I didn't answer my mother the way she wanted me to. That takes something I didn't know I had in the quantity I apparently did. Holding a position when the people you love are asking you to abandon it. That's not stubbornness, though it can look like it from the outside. It's the knowledge that you are worth the discomfort you're causing. Ken Locke is registered. The doc is repaired. Nolan is in counseling and writing emails that sound like a person trying to become someone better, and I am choosing to believe that's possible while also not staking my piece on it. Grammy's note said, "You always showed up. Don't let them take this from you." I didn't understand it then. I do now. Showing up. For the property, for yourself, for the version of things that is actually true, is not a passive act. It is the whole thing. It is all of it. The structure holds. I just had to stop being the one holding it up for everyone else.